Welcome to Melt. I'm Suresh Venkat. Now, one of the biggest topics of conversation for the Indian marketer in recent months has been ONDC. The Open Network for Digital Commerce or ONDC initiative by the Union government aims to be a game changer for the Indian digital economy. The chatter on ONDC was accelerated last week as industry body, the MMA, along with GroupM India, launched the ONDC Playbook, a step-by-step guide to help marketers leverage ONDC. To know more, we were in conversation with Shireesh Joshi, Chief Business Officer of ONDC. How can businesses embrace the ONDC framework? What exactly is the ONDC business model? How does it plan to drive usage? All that and more as we get ready to melt with ONDC's Shireesh Joshi. Shireesh, you just launched a toolkit for marketers at the MMA Impact event in Delhi. What's the foremost lesson for marketers from that toolkit?
I think there's a lot to learn about what ONDC is, how it works, and therefore what you can do with it. ONDC is a tool, it's not a product. And so it's a capability that everyone must understand. And what MMA has done is a pretty reasonably comprehensive job, I would say, in terms of explaining all those aspects, what's possible, and gone sector by sector to explain what the opportunity is. So it is I would say, a very useful read for any marketer, both to understand as well as to figure out what they could do with it.
How does a platform like the MMA help evangelize your key message to marketers?
MMA has a membership of brands and companies, and therefore, as part of that congregation, they're able to present the audience to whom we can explain ONDC. This is the second event with the MMA that we've done. And so we've done this at both places where from their membership, they're able to invite the right audience and then we're able to explain or have an opportunity to explain from our perspective as well as answer questions. There are always questions on ONDC.
Yes, there are many questions. So let's get into them. Lots of people think ONDC is going to replicate UPI's success. Do you feel the burden of that expectation on you?
Actually, that's very good tailwind for us. It might have been burden of expectation if we didn't have precedent, but I think India has established a track record of building digital infrastructure at population scale. We've seen Aadhaar, we've seen CoWIN, we've seen UPI, and so it's actually very good. And also, a large part of the population also understand this. This is not just about businesses, it's not just about key people in the government. Everybody now understands that digital tools are available to them. So the opportunity to do eKYC via Aadhaar or being able to send and receive money, almost everyone is doing it. You go down the highways and somebody selling tea on a tea stall by the side of the highways has a UPI code. So that it's actually tailwind for us. It's not a burden at all.
Now, having said that, payments and e-commerce are two very different domains. What has ONDC learned from the success of UPI?
It's not so much learn from success of UPI, but the fundamental principle on which ONDC is based is identical to UPI, which is interoperability and unbundling. So you do not have to have two parties in the same tool to be able to complete the transaction. Now, if you were, let's say, having a particular credit card, you needed a merchant with the POS machine that could accept that card, and only then could you do a transaction. Same with commerce today. You buyer and seller have to be in the same application. So that bundled version, with UPI, you could have two parties with bank accounts in two different banks using two different applications and still being able to send money, and in a very simple fashion. Scan a QR code or just enter a 10-digit mobile number and off you go. That principle is what we have done, but of course commerce is a much more complicated subject. So while we can create the interoperability in an unbundled fashion and the protocol, the equivalent of the QR code, there is a lot of work to be done in case of commerce.
Another popular perception is that ONDC will threaten the so-called duopolies in the market, Amazon, Flipkart or Swiggy, Zomato. Any truth to that perception?
So yes and no, right? The yes part is anytime there is something new, there is always a threat, right? So when television came, people said, oh, radio has a threat. When internet came, they said television has a threat. So whenever something new comes, there is always that feeling of threat. And it's not so much a direct threat, but the fact that eventually if there is some limited capacity, then there will be an impact. And that impact has been. Same with traditional trade, there was a threat when modern trade came. Big assortment, convenient shopping, etc. But did it take everything away? No. So now both of them sit by side. Then along comes e-commerce, and again a threat that e-commerce will change everything. Does it take everything away? No, it doesn't. So they all sit by side. So basically the portfolio of options increases. And now you have one more option, which is network-based commerce. So instead of platform-based commerce, you have network-based commerce. and that will also become part of the mix that will come to play. Now, whether it is a threat or an opportunity really depends on how they see it and how they utilize it. The network itself is neutral. The network itself is inclusive. Big or small, all players can, and many are already becoming part of it. We have big companies that are part of it, big brands that are part of it, e-commerce companies that are part of it. And so it's really an opportunity for even the others to recognize that and join the network and benefit from it.
And do you view the perception of being a threat, to whatever degree, as an obstacle to your business model?
Oh, no, not at all. That's not an obstacle because in the end, the degree of penetration for e-commerce is so low. Our focus is actually the undigitized and the rest of the world, rest of the country, which currently is not accessing e-commerce in some fashion. So there again, I would say the parallel with UPI holds, which is you have existing instruments of payment. But what UPI has come and done is expanded the number of people who can participate. And its goal wasn't to kill net banking, or its goal wasn't to kill credit cards. It was just to simply enable a much larger population to be able to do transaction. Same with ONDC. Our goal is to enable a much larger pool of buyers and sellers to be part of the e-commerce network. And for the existing players, it really depends on how they use the opportunity or if they don't. So it's not ONDC itself will cause an impact. It's really their own decisions and their own strategies that will.
Now, returns and grievances are big customer-facing facets of e-commerce. How is ONDC going to handle these two aspects?
They're actually not the biggest. Okay, so if you look at 100 orders, the percentage of orders that have a grievance or a return is actually small, except maybe in apparel category. Otherwise, it's fairly small. So it's not a big deal. But yes, when it happens, to the person it happens, it is a big deal. The good news is that ONDC is coming into play at a time when e-commerce has already been around for several years. So let's take returns, for example. Now, returns have many aspects. First of all is at the time of buying, the buyer should know whether an item is returnable or not. Even in current marketplaces, everything is not returnable. Or you might have, let's say, a special festival and extreme low prices during that time. Now, some of those items or many of those items may not be returnable. So first is the terms and conditions that the seller has established. It's not a platform-based one, or even in our case, a network-based one. The seller determines whether I want to accept returns or not. Right? And so that becomes part of their catalog description. Now it's for a buyer to decide when they're buying an item, do they want it to be returnable or not? In which case, if a seller is not offering return, they should choose not to buy from there, take it from somebody where there is a return possible. So that's the first part of it. Second, if there is a reason for return, then it needs to fit those conditions. Right? So there's a time period. Let's say in 3 days, you have to offer a return. So those conditions have to be met. Third is validation of return. So sellers now have learned that you will not blindly accept everything, that you will evaluate. Right? And so some require the customer to send a picture. Others will say that when my delivery person comes to pick it up, they will validate it. Somebody else will say, you send the item, once we receive it, then we will validate it. So sellers have also established what is acceptable to them as a validation. All of those will be on ONDC. So the good news is that if a practice exists, ONDC can enable it. So there's nothing that you experience today that you can't experience on ONDC. So that's as far as the return is concerned. Now let's say the return does not get accepted, the customer has a grievance. Today, at the scale we are in, the operations is fairly straightforward, where the buyer and seller applications will interact, and there is a provision in the protocol to send those messages and respond. But let's say if that digital conversation does not resolve it, then as per e-commerce rules, both the buyer and seller application have a grievance officer. And so the two grievance officers will connect over email, phone call, or however they wish to, and seek to resolve it. Now, when that also does not get resolved, then we have an issue and grievance management protocol where there is a much more in-depth exchange between the two parties digitally in terms of resolving it. And eventually, then you have ODR. So this entire digital history and trail gets shared with the jointly agreed arbitrator, and who will look at that digital history and provide a pronouncement. And if that still fails to satisfy, then you have the court of law. So again, the tools that are available to address grievances are available here. I would say, if anything, maybe to a more democratic and decentralized extent, but the tools are available.
Now, the other thing that e-commerce grapples with is the reams and reams, or bytes and petabytes, if you will, of data that's generated daily. Who will be the custodian of consumer data in the ONDC e-commerce system?
So consumer data, the buyer applications will be the custodians, because the buyer is a client of the buyer application. For every time the order is confirmed, then the buyer information is traveling to the seller side because an invoice has to be made, delivery has to be initiated. And so only for the confirmed transaction will the seller side receive the information about that specific buyer. So that's where the data resides. ONDC does not keep details of these transactions. What we keep right now is aggregated information, and at some stage we will begin to publish aggregate information once it will not identify either competitive information, and we certainly don't keep any PII. So the principle is to provide aggregate information. Let's say you might want to know at a point in time how much food ordering is taking place in Meerut, or you might want to know how much apparel is being sold in Gujarat. So for businesses to create their own strategy, to identify opportunities and focus, for that aggregate information without these details, we will be making available. We are working on that system. But other than that, data is only available with the parties who are part of that transaction or who have a relationship with whichever entity is generating that data.
What are the big challenges in bringing FMCG players or consumer durable companies into the ONDC network?
None. We have Unilever live, we have ITC live, we have P&G live, we have Boat live. So actually none.
On the flip side, any challenges of bringing smaller retailers into the ONDC network?
No. Small retail is also here. Individual kirana stores are here. Small restaurants are here. Artisans are here. Handicraft makers are here. Farmers are here. So no, really, the challenge is not so much in whether they can join, but in the act of digitization. So for example, if let's say there is a weaver, then you have to photograph all the weaves that they're making in order to create a catalog, because you can't buy on a description, right? You can't say, okay, carpet with floral pattern. Who knows what the flower is? And so if I see the pattern, I might feel comfortable buying it. So pictures are needed. So those actions in terms of digitizing the catalog, that's where some help is needed. But other than that, there is no restriction or even an intellectual barrier as we deal with these various sectors.
Now let's talk D2C. What do D2C marketers need to know in terms of developing an ONDC strategy?
I think many D2C marketers already know, and it actually solves the biggest question D2C marketers have had. Now, why did companies do D2C? Because they had a need to, first of all, show their entire catalog, because in marketplaces, you might not be able to show every single SKU, every single version of it. Second, you might want to operate business on your terms and conditions vis-a-vis terms and conditions that a marketplace might impose. So D2C allows you that channel. And of course, it gives you direct access to consumer data. And so those are all pluses. The challenge with D2C is twofold. One is traffic, and second is economics. And so people don't shop in most categories from one particular company. If I'm buying my monthly kirana, I'm buying multiple products from multiple companies. Now, it's not convenient for me to go to 10 different companies' D2C sites and do it. But on ONDC, if all those companies are present, I will just have one cart. One by one, I will add products from various companies to the cart. They may be coming from the D2C operations of those companies, but for me, it's a single cart. And so my experience is as if the entire thing is a single store, although it's not. So that opportunity is big, and the consumer universe on ONDC has already crossed 100 million buyers. So for D2C companies to have a large pool of buyers ready, this is really, completes, has the benefits of why they did D2C in the first place and addresses the challenges that they face while doing that.
You spoke about buyers. Now let's build on that. In your pilot markets, have customers easily understood how ONDC actually works?
We do not know, and we will be fielding surveys that will help get at how much they've actually understood. Honestly, they really do not need to, right? So how much do you need to understand of how, let's say, video conferencing is done through the phone? All you need to know is where I click and I see the other person and I just simply talk and speak. Right? So you don't always need to know the technology. So what consumers need to know are really two things. One, which is that you have now multiple options of buyer applications, and through any one of them, you can access the entire pool of sellers. So you're now not locked into a particular platform where some sellers are only available here and some sellers are only available there. Now you have the entire seller pool available regardless of which application I choose. And when I choose, then I will have the same journey experience that I experienced today. And that's only starting point, because we are simply migrating what we know of e-commerce onto ONDC. But as time goes by, newer and newer experiences will also emerge that currently platforms are not able to create and provide. And so you should expect that also to take shape over time.
Now to build on that, unlike a traditional e-commerce system, you have multiple apps for sellers and for buyers. What challenges does this pose for marketers?
Actually, it makes it, well, initially it will pose a challenge because they're used to dealing with a couple of large platforms and therefore simply spending and getting there. In a way, while it was expensive, but it was also easy. Now we're in a situation which is not entirely, but coming closer to the pre-digital era where you had multiple shops to sell through. So if you were, let's say, an electronics brand, you would have electronic stores in an entire city which will be selling you. Now, which of those stores will you do a special deal with? You would take a few maybe from one time to time, but it's a small part of your overall cost. And so that as a principle where I actually do not need to be dependent on a particular channel to access an entire universe, that fact has changed. When that fact changes, then even the practices have to change. And I think there will be much greater power to brands talking directly to consumers independent of the shopping channel, because the shopping channel has now become fungible and you can choose any of the buyer applications to take place. So I do think that there will be a shift, but how the shift takes place, we will see.
Shireesh, ONDC also has a B2B component to its business model. What kind of transactions do you see happening on the B2B side?
So transactions have begun. We've already crossed 100. Right now, the B2B use case that we've enabled is retailers buying from distributors. And so that actually feeds the B2C part that we've already begun. So retailers who are there, we've enabled fashion, we've enabled grocery. So grocery retailers can now buy grocery items from distributors of companies. One by one, of course, as we still have to bring most of the companies on board. But as companies come on board, then a Kirana can do their inward buying through an ONDC-based application. Same with apparel stores. And with time, of course, more use cases, more categories will also come on board.
Now, let's switch gears to marketing ONDC itself. Do you need to invest significantly in customer education?
We do, not just customer education. First, it is in partner education. So to help organizations understand, because they are the ones who will be building applications and directly connecting with us. Some of them who are buyer and seller applications will also be connecting with buyers and sellers, and they actually need to educate their customer base. But we are also creating collateral which they can use, so they don't. Each person does not have to build their own. And so, yes, we do have a role in helping our partners, network participants, sorry, not partners, to be able to explain it to their customers. And we are helping them with collateral, videos, and content.
Which brings me to the obvious question. Does ONDC fund such marketing initiatives by itself?
Production of this, so if there are videos that we've made, we've spent to produce those videos, but those are then freely available for participants to use.
Now, one of the big complaints, especially by food producers, is that food delivery platforms charge upwards of 25% of the value of the food order for delivery. Will ONDC create a more economical option for food producers?
Okay, so already we are a more economical option, and that's when we are small scale. I believe when we get to much larger scale, it will only get more economical. So the components of the what you describe on ONDC are really the buyer applications commission in whatever form it takes, and the service fee that the seller application is charging. ONDC is currently free, but at a future point in time, even if you were to charge, the principle is going to be that the charge will be so small that it will not be a barrier for even the small player. So that's it, right? Now, today it's seller and buyer applications. Tomorrow it will be 3. Today's seller and buyer application combined commission is much smaller than the numbers you've done. And this is at small scale. So my anticipation is that as the network grows, it will become a far more economical way to do e-commerce than the current platform-based one.
Shireesh, you hinted at this a little earlier. So let's dig deeper. What is ONDC's business model, and do you see this changing as you go ahead and build the network?
ONDC does not have a business model because ONDC is a not-for-profit organization. But yes, ONDC does incur costs. So currently that's being funded through shareholder funds. With time, as I said, we have an opportunity to draw on more funds as we need, as well as begin charging a very, very small fee. So if you think about the internet itself, right, you pay, if you take a URL or a domain, then you're paying an annual registry fee. And that's it. And it's a very, very small fraction of an overall business cost that you might be setting up. So in a similar fashion, we might, for example, charge a registry fee or a very small percentage of the transaction. And while it will be very small and negligible from an individual transaction standpoint, but once you're doing transaction billions, we anticipate it will be sufficient to cover our costs. So the model is to do very, very minimal charge to cover our costs on an ongoing basis, which also means to keep costs to a minimum. So we're not going to be a very large, fat organization. We remain lean, and we are actually counting on network participants to invest their innovation, their minds, and their building of scale to actually help build the network.
Now, let me ask you a really obvious question. What does the open in ONDC actually mean for sellers, deliverers, and buyers?
So open means literally no barriers. And let me give you a physical world equivalent, right? So let's say you step out of this hotel and you want to go to some place. So you have options. You have options of auto rickshaw. You have options of taxis who are standing here. You have options of taxis you can call from there. or you can walk across the road, get into the metro station. Right now, all of them are available to you, and it's your choice as a buyer to decide which one you want to take, which one you don't want to take. The roads on which the taxi and the auto rickshaw and the buses are traveling is the same road. So the infrastructure is the road, but the services are free to pick up passengers, and the same passenger is an option. That's the equivalent. So we are like the road. We are building the common basis on which any service provider of any type, a very, very basic one, or a relatively more expensive one, or a really highly engineered one like a metro, all of them can operate on that basis. So that's the idea of open, which is to make it easy and make it possible for anyone to participate.
Okay, Shireesh, final question for you. What do you shop most often on your phone, either with ONDC or without?
I shop for a variety of things, electronics, books, not too much on clothes. So that's, I guess, largely, and then tickets, either tickets for travel or entertainment. That would be my kind of frequent purchased items. But on ONDC, right now, it's largely food. Every time there's a new player, I do occasionally try out stuff. So when the first appliance brand came on, then I ordered an electric iron. That arrived, that felt good. So I do try out a few things here and there, but obviously the frequent one is food. That's something you need every day, and so there's an opportunity to place an order. Plus, I make it a point whenever I'm in events regarding ONDC, and then I request the host to actually place an order for whatever snacks they're doing on ONDC so that they can experience it. Because many times in these forums, I get questions from people who've actually not tried it themselves. They're sort of operating from a conceptual, hypothetical memory or a imagination. And I say, just try it out, order it yourself, and then you tell me whether it is working or not. And invariably, it does.
On that note, Shireesh Joshi of ONDC, thank you for talking to us at Melt.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And with that, it's a wrap on this episode. You can follow Melt on social media. The handle is Ready to Melt, or simply log on to readytomelt.com if you'd like to follow me. I'm @Suvenk on Twitter. Till next week, goodbye and thanks for watching.